Hunter walked slowly through the dense forest, the crisp air of early autumn brushing against his face. The towering trees around him created a canopy that filtered the sunlight, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. His boots crunched on the thick carpet of leaves that had already begun to fall, signaling the change of seasons. The air smelled earthy and fresh, the kind of scent that always put his mind at ease. He was alone in these woods, as he often was, his only company the sounds of rustling leaves and the distant calls of birds. But today, there was something different about the forest. It felt off. There was an unnatural stillness, as if the usual life of the woods had momentarily paused. Hunter couldn't quite place it, but it tugged at the back of his mind. His instincts, honed from years of living in harmony with the wilderness, told him something was wrong. As he moved deeper into the woods, he caught a faint sound, a rustling of leaves that seemed too deliberate to be caused by the wind. His eyes scanned the area around him, and that's when he saw it. Barely visible through a cluster of brush and low branches, a shape moved in the underbrush. It was small, but it moved awkwardly, stumbling as it tried to navigate the forest floor. Hunter's heart skipped a beat as he took a cautious step closer. There, curled beneath the cover of a bush, was a bobcat. Its fur was matted and stained with blood, and its breathing was shallow and labored. The bobcat's body was trembling, and Hunter could tell that it was in immense pain. But what struck him the most was the sight of the creature's swollen belly. She was pregnant. His stomach twisted in worry. If something wasn't done soon, not only would the mother die, but her unborn kittens would be lost as well. He knelt beside the bobcat, careful not to startle her. Her yellow eyes flickered weakly as she looked up at him, full of fear, but too weak to defend herself. She was barely able to lift her head, and it was clear that whatever injury she had sustained was severe. The wound on her leg was deep, and there were other signs of distress across her body. Without a second thought, Hunter carefully reached out to touch her. He spoke softly, though he knew the animal couldn't understand his words. He wasn't sure why he was so certain the creature needed help, but something inside him told him he couldn't leave her to die alone. Carefully, he slid his arms underneath the bobcat's body, cradling her gently but firmly. Despite her obvious pain, she didn't fight him. Perhaps she realized that her only chance for survival lay in his hands. Hunter carefully stood, adjusting his grip as he cradled the bobcat against his chest. She was surprisingly light, though he could feel the weight of her pregnancy pressing against him. Every step felt more urgent as he made his way back toward his cabin, his mind racing with thoughts of how to save her. The path back to his cabin seemed longer than usual. The wind picked up, rustling the branches overhead, but all he could focus on was the creature in his arms. The bobcat's body was so still now, her breathing faint. But Hunter refused to give up. He'd helped animals before. His cabin was a refuge for creatures in need, but he had never dealt with a situation like this. He wasn't sure if she would survive the night, but he would do everything he could to try. As he arrived at his cabin, he carefully laid her down on the soft blankets he had prepared, creating a small, cozy den for her to rest. His hands trembled as he worked to clean her wounds and tend to her injuries. He knew that the next few hours, perhaps days, would be critical. There was no guarantee she would survive, but Hunter was determined. He couldn't bear the thought of letting this creature die, especially with life growing inside her. The days that followed were long, and Hunter remained by Willow's side, tending to her with unwavering care. Each morning, he would check her injuries, gently cleaning the cuts on her legs and applying fresh bandages. He kept her in a quiet corner of his cabin, away from the noise and the bustle of the outside world, where she could rest and heal in peace. At first she remained quiet and watchful, her large yellow eyes following his every move. She was still a wild creature at heart, but there was an odd calmness about her now, as if she understood that Hunter was not a threat. She seemed to accept his presence, her tense muscles loosening under his touch, though she never fully let her guard down. Hunter spent most of his days working outside, but he always made time to check on Willow. The bond between them grew slowly but steadily. While he was no expert in animal care, he knew enough to help her heal. He brought her food, small, game, fresh water, and made sure she had a comfortable, safe place to rest. As the days passed, she began to show signs of improvement. The fever that had plagued her when he first found her started to subside, and the deep cuts on her legs began to close up. Though she remained thin and weak, there was a subtle shift in her demeanor. She began to eat more eagerly, her body slowly regaining strength. One morning, Hunter was sitting by the fire when he heard a low, almost inaudible growl coming from the corner of the room. His heart skipped a beat as he looked up to find Willow on her feet, her body stiff with alertness. She was pacing now, her movements slower than usual, but there was a noticeable restlessness in her. The signs were clear. She was close to giving birth. Hunter had prepared for this moment, but he had no idea how difficult the process might be for her. He quickly moved to her side, speaking to her in soft, calming tones. His presence seemed to soothe her for a moment, but the instinctual need to find a more secluded place took over. She paced more frantically now, her eyes darting toward the small den he had prepared for her. Hunter quickly cleared the area, pulling a thick blanket and pillows around her, ensuring she had enough space to move freely if needed. He knew the time was near, and there was nothing more he could do but watch and wait. The night stretched on in quiet anticipation, with Willow occasionally letting out a soft whine or low growl. Hunter stayed nearby, offering her comfort as best as he could. He could see the effort it took for her to rest, her body occasionally trembling with contractions. The process was long, and Hunter's patience was tested as he sat by her side, watching the bobcat struggle in silence. Then, just as the moonlight shone through the cabin's window, the first tiny cry echoed through the room. Hunter's breath caught in his throat, and a surge of relief rushed over him. The first of Willow's kittens had arrived, a tiny ball of fur that squirmed weakly as it made its way to its mother. He could hardly believe it. This tiny creature, born of the wild, had made it through the night. The instinct in Willow kicked in almost immediately, and she began to clean the kitten with gentle, purposeful strokes of her tongue. Her movements, though tired, were filled with the care only a mother could give. Hunter remained still, watching in awe as the scene unfolded before him. The other kittens followed soon after, each born into a world of love and protection that Hunter had provided. The cabin, once silent and empty, now had the soft sounds of new life filling the air. Willow, exhausted but relieved, settled down with her kittens, their tiny forms curling close to her warmth. Hunter couldn't help but smile as he watched the small family, a sense of fulfillment washing over him. Despite the hardships and the uncertainty of the past days, everything had come together in the end. Willow had survived, and now her kittens had a chance at life, thanks to the care and attention he had given her. For the first time in weeks, the forest outside seemed quieter, as if it, too, were taking a moment to breathe in the miracle of life. In the weeks that followed, the cabin was filled with the quiet bustle of life. Willow's 3 kittens grew quickly, their tiny bodies gaining strength with each passing day. At first, they were nothing more than small, squirming balls of fur, their eyes still closed, and their movements erratic. But as the days passed, Hunter watched in awe as they began to develop. Their eyes slowly opened, revealing the same amber glow as their mother's, and their tiny paws became more coordinated, pushing them to explore their little world. They began to crawl and stumble, trying to figure out the world beyond their mother's warm embrace. Hunter kept a close watch on them, making sure that Willow had everything she needed: food, water, and plenty of space to care for her kittens. It was clear that she was a protective and attentive mother, always keeping her kittens close. He'd often find her curled around them, her body a barrier between them and the outside world. Her instincts had returned in full force, and she kept the small family safe, even as the kittens grew more curious about the world around them. The cabin was quieter than usual during the day. Hunter would find himself checking on the family more often than he needed to, simply because he enjoyed watching the kittens explore and play. They had started to move around the room, toddling over to the small piles of blankets and toys Hunter had placed for them, their soft meows filling the space. The little ones seemed fascinated by everything, whether it was the fire crackling in the hearth or the shadows that danced along the walls. Hunter would smile to himself as he watched them, amused by their clumsy antics. Despite their wild nature, there was an undeniable innocence to them. Each evening as the sun set behind the mountains, Willow would nuzzle her kittens closer to her side, her gaze still alert and watchful. Hunter had begun to realize just how much he had come to care for these creatures. They were no longer just a wounded animal and her babies. They had become part of his life, part of his daily routine. He couldn't deny the bond that had formed between him and Willow. She had trusted him when she was at her weakest, and now, seeing her with her kittens, he felt a deep sense of connection to the entire family. As the weeks continued to pass, Willow's kittens grew more active, chasing after one another, tumbling and play-fighting with their sharp claws and quick reflexes. The cabin became a haven for them, a place where they could learn, grow, and bond. But despite the comfort and warmth of Hunter's home, the forest outside still called to them. Willow, though content for the moment, would often sit by the window, her ears twitching as if listening for something in the distance. Her wild instincts were still very much alive. and Hunter knew that she would eventually have to return to the wild. One evening, as the sun began to dip behind the trees, Hunter watched Willow carefully. She had been pacing back and forth in the cabin for the past few hours, her movements restless and quick. Her body was no longer as frail as it had been when he first found her, but now there was a quiet tension in her demeanor, something Hunter could not ignore. The time had come. Willow had cared for her kittens as best as she could, but it was time for them to be released into the wild, to learn how to survive on their own. Hunter had known this day would come, though he had dreaded it. He had grown attached to the Bobcat family, and the thought of Willow leaving again brought a sharp pang to his chest. He wanted to keep her, wanted to make her a part of his world, but deep down he knew that she belonged to the forest. It was her home, and it was where she would be happiest. That evening, as Willow walked toward the door, her eyes locked onto the trees just beyond the cabin. She paused for a moment, her body stiff with anticipation. Her kittens, now strong and curious, were still playing by the fire. They had grown so much in such a short time, and it was clear that they, too, were ready for the next step in their journey. Hunter stood silently in the doorway, watching Willow, knowing that it was time to say goodbye. Though his heart ached, he understood that this was the way of the wild. Life was cyclical, and it was time for Willow and her kittens to return to their true home. The days grew shorter as the season turned toward winter, and the first frost had begun to creep across the forest floor. Hunter watched the change in the air, the crisp bite that settled in each morning, the soft, whispering winds that brought the scent of snow. As much as he loved the quiet, peaceful life he had carved for himself in the woods, there was a bitter sweetness in the air. Willow had grown restless again, and Hunter had noticed it more over the last few days. Her eyes had become more distant, her ears perked as she listened to the sounds beyond the cabin. She was no longer the weak, injured creature he had found that day. She had grown strong and confident. Her coat had thickened with the change of season, her muscles firm and her movements graceful. The time had come for her to leave, but Hunter wasn't sure if he was ready to let go. The kittens, now nearly fully grown, were almost as agile and clever as their mother. They had adapted quickly to their surroundings, becoming more independent by the day. They still clung to Willow for comfort and security, but their curiosity had expanded beyond the walls of the cabin. They explored the grounds surrounding Hunter's home with an eagerness that reminded him of their mother's early days in the wild. The sight of the young bobcats chasing each other through the snow, their lithe bodies weaving between the trees, made Hunter smile with pride. But each day, as evening fell, Willow would linger near the door, her gaze locked on the forest outside. She seemed to be calculating something, as if weighing the moment to return. There was no longer a fear or hesitation in her eyes, only an understanding that her place was beyond the cabin's walls, in the heart of the wilderness that had always been her home. Hunter had come to realize more and more that while the bond between him and Willow was strong, it was rooted in a shared understanding of freedom. She had allowed him to care for her and her kittens, to protect them during their time of need, but the wild had never truly let her go. It was only a matter of time before she would have to return to the life she was born to live. One cold morning, Hunter woke to find Willow standing at the edge of the cabin's doorway. The sun had barely begun to rise, casting a soft glow over the frost-covered ground. Her body was poised, her muscles tense, and her gaze was fixed on something far off in the distance. The air seemed to hang with anticipation, the quietness of the world around them amplifying the moment. Hunter stepped toward her, his heart heavy with the knowledge that this was the moment they had both been waiting for, though he had dreaded it. He watched as Willow turned her head slightly, her amber eyes meeting his for a long, silent moment. There was no fear or sadness in her gaze, just a quiet acknowledgement of what was to come. Hunter felt a pang of sorrow deep in his chest, but he knew he had to let her go. He had given her a second chance at life, and in return, she had given him something he would never forget. A connection to the wild, to the untamed beauty of the forest that existed just beyond the reach of his cabin. The kittens, now fully grown and just as strong as their mother, wandered in and out of the room, oblivious to what was unfolding. They were still young enough to rely on Willow's protection, but there was no mistaking that they, too, were ready to move on. Hunter watched as Willow gave one last look to her kittens, who now played around the fire, their playful growls and soft mews filling the room. She seemed to hesitate for only a moment before turning away, her body sleek and confident, ready to return to the wild. Hunter opened the door for her, his hand resting on the frame as he watched her step into the cold, crisp air. She didn't look back, but he didn't need her to. In that moment, he knew that she would find her way, and her kittens would find their own path as well. The forest was vast, and though it would be hard to say goodbye, he knew that the wild was where they belonged. As Willow disappeared into the trees, Hunter felt an overwhelming sense of both loss and gratitude. He had saved her life, and in turn, she had given him a gift far more precious than he could have ever imagined, the experience of life in its purest form, untamed and free. Though she was gone, the memories of her time in his cabin and the family she had raised would stay with him forever. The forest outside seemed to breathe a little easier now, as if it had reclaimed one of its own. A year had passed since Willow and her kittens had disappeared into the wild. Time seemed to have a different rhythm in the forest, as if the changing seasons moved more slowly here than anywhere else. Hunter had returned to his solitary life, but something within him had shifted. The memories of Willow's quiet presence, her gaze full of trust and understanding, had stayed with him, lingering like the warmth of the fire that once crackled in the corner of his cabin. The kittens, now grown and strong, were part of his heart, though he hadn't seen them since that cold, clear morning when Willow had led them all back into the wild. It had been the right thing to do. He knew that. But still, the emptiness in the cabin felt a little deeper, a little quieter. As autumn descended once again upon the forest, bringing with it the scent of fallen leaves and crisp winds, Hunter found himself thinking of Willow and her family more often than usual. The world outside his cabin seemed to be full of memories of them, places where they had once played, where Willow had rested, where her kittens had tumbled and pounced in the safety of his home. The cabin, though warm and cozy, had become quieter over the months. It was as if the very air had become a little lonelier, without the sounds of their playful mews or the quiet hum of Willow's presence in the background. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Hunter settled by the fire, his thoughts drifting once more to the Bobcat family. He had no reason to expect they would return, but the thought of them never fully left his mind. It was during these quiet moments, when the woods were still and the stars began to pierce the darkening sky, that he would find himself straining his ears to catch any sounds from the forest outside. But tonight, as the evening air grew colder, something caught his attention. A distant, faint sound that seemed to break through the stillness of the night. At first he thought it was his imagination, perhaps the wind shifting in the trees or an owl calling out in the distance. But then the sound came again, soft, almost like a cry. His heart lurched. It was a sound that was both familiar and foreign, a mixture of desperation and fragility. It was a cry of need, and something deep inside him told him it wasn't just any animal. Hunter stood abruptly, his pulse quickening as he listened. His eyes darted to the door, then back to the darkened forest outside. The cry sounded again, a little louder this time, and it was unmistakable. It was the cry of a bobcat, a young one. He could hear it clearly now, its small, plaintive wail cutting through the cold night air. Without hesitation, Hunter grabbed his coat and rushed to the door, his breath clouding in front of him as he stepped outside into the chill. The woods, as always, were vast and silent, but now there was a sense of urgency that filled the space between the trees. He moved quickly, his boots crunching on the frozen ground, following the direction of the cry. The sound was faint at first, but it grew louder as he moved deeper into the forest. His heart raced as he pushed through the underbrush, his breath coming in short bursts. The night had a stillness to it that was almost unnatural, but the cry kept pulling him forward, guiding him through the woods. It wasn't long before he came to the familiar clearing by the stream, where he had found Willow all those months ago. And there, in the moonlight, he saw her, Willow. But she wasn't alone. Beside her, trembling and weak, was one of her kittens. A young bobcat, barely a few months old, its fur matted and damp, was cradled against her side. It was obvious the kitten was in distress, its small body shaking from either cold or sickness. Willow, ever the protective mother, was close by, her eyes flickering toward Hunter as he approached. Hunter's heart broke at the sight of the kitten, remembering how fragile the young ones had been when he first saw them. This was a moment he would never forget. The cry, the urgency, and the unmistakable bond between mother and child. As he knelt beside the kitten, his hands shaking, he gently scooped it up. Willow, though still wary of him, did not protest. There was a quiet trust in her gaze, as if she knew he had cared for her and her family before, and would do so again. The young bobcat mewed weakly in his arms, and Hunter knew that he couldn't let it suffer. He carried the kitten back to the cabin, his mind racing with thoughts of what he could do to help. Willow followed at a distance, her eyes never leaving them. When they reached the warmth of the cabin, Hunter carefully placed the kitten down near the fire. He checked its condition, thin, weak, and cold, but it had life in its eyes. He worked quickly, offering warmth, food, and care, knowing that time was critical. As the hours passed, the kitten began to show signs of improvement, its trembling subsiding as it warmed up. Hunter looked out the window at the darkened woods, his heart full of gratitude and awe. It was as if Willow had come back to him, not only to seek help for her injured kitten, but to remind him of the bond they had shared. In the quiet of the night, as the fire crackled and the kitten slowly recovered, Hunter realized that the wildness of the forest would always find its way back to him, and that his place, no matter how small in the grand scheme of things, was to care for it whenever it needed him.